Nearly 4 in 5 high earners are not going to retire comfortably. At least that's what some recent research has said. And this is despite auto-enrolment coming in to help us save more into our pensions each month for retirement, and there now being more information than ever available on pensions and retirement planning. Now, how reliable is this data? Because I've gone through the data and the report and I just do not think it's accurate. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining why I think that's the case. I'm also going to be going through how much I actually think you need to be spending each month when it comes to retirement based on your current income, and ultimately the pension pot size you're going to need to get you to that level of income. But if you're new here, my name's Ben, and I've worked in financial planning for the last 10 years, helping people gain more clarity and confidence around their pensions and their retirement plan. So the recent research by the DWP suggests that 77% of people earning over £62,000 are not going to meet what they call a comfortable retirement. And by a comfortable retirement, they mean for a single person, the ability to spend £45,400 a year in retirement, and for a couple, £62,700. Now, the first thing I think we need to do is actually convert that to monthly spending, because quite frankly, no one thinks of how much they spend in annual terms, because that just doesn't make sense. People get paid monthly, and therefore we should be working on a monthly basis when we're working out how much you're going to be spending and therefore how much you're going to need in retirement. So for a single person, that's about £3,800 a month. And for the couple, that's about £5,200 a month. So before we actually work out how much you're going to be spending in retirement and therefore how much pension pot you'll need, let's actually first look at someone that's, let's say, earning £90,000 a year whilst they're working. So their take home each month is going to be about £5,000 or £60,000 a year if you want to use the DWP terms. So based on that, that's saying they're going to be spending about, 75% of their pre-retirement spending in retirement. So the first thing we need to do is actually ask ourselves, are you going to be spending as much in retirement as you were whilst you were working? Now, clearly the answer to this is going to be different for everyone, but ultimately we first need to look at the sort of expenses that are going to reduce or disappear once you've retired, and then also look at the expenses that are likely to come up or increase once you stop working. Now, for most people, hopefully when they do come to retire, they are going to be close to, if not mortgage free. And some recent research has suggested that the average household in the UK spends about 20% of their post-tax income on their mortgage payment each month. The second is the fact that you're going to have no commuting costs. Now, the amount that you're spending on this whilst you're working is clearly going to differ massively depending on how close your work is to your home and if you are working from home or in the office full time. But again, this could easily be, £200, £300, £400 a month if you are, going to work day in, day out. And the third is one that I think a lot of people actually overlook and I suppose forget. And that's the fact that you're not going to be saving money anymore because you've done that throughout your working life. And again, the amount is going to vary from person to person, but this could easily be another couple of £100 a month, which you've been saving for your retirement that you're no longer going to need. So when you look at those three expenses alone, that could easily be over £1,000, which you've needed whilst you've been working. But as soon as you're retired, you're not going to need to be spending that money each month anymore. Now, having gone through all of those reduced expenses or the expenses that are quite frankly, probably going to disappear, we now need to look at why your expenses may actually increase and the areas which actually might increase. And the first is that, if you are in a position where you're having a cliff edge retirement, which is effectively, you finish work on a Friday and on a Saturday you are effectively retired and you're never going back to work again in any sort of capacity, you are now in a position where you've got a 7-day weekend. So naturally there are going to be things that, you were spending less on whilst you're working that are now going to increase. And most of that is going to be discretionary spending. So things like grabbing a coffee, going out for dinner, meeting a friend for lunch, that sort of thing, maybe some more travel. So this is what we've also got to factor into the equation, because although there are going to be expenses that disappear or are going to reduce, there are expenses that are probably going to increase at the same time. So let's go back to the example I spoke about earlier, where we've got someone earning £90,000 whilst they're working, and after tax, that is about £5,000 a month they got coming into their bank account. Now, for the purposes of the example, I've assumed they're spending about 30% of their post-tax income on their mortgage. So in this example, that's about £1,500 a month. Now, although the data suggests that 20% is the average throughout the UK, I know from personal experience and through clients at work that the reality is this is probably a bit higher than this. Now, I've also assumed they're saving about £500 a month, which again is about 10% of their post-tax income. So whether that's into a pension, an ISA, or any other vehicle. And therefore, that leaves the remaining £3,000 a month as their baseline spending after you've taken out the mortgage costs and the money they're saving. So for the purposes of this example, the £3,000 a month is what I'm going to be using as their baseline level of expenses when they come into retirement. Now, I've based all of these figures on them retiring at the age of 60 and being invested in a balanced portfolio of 60% equities and 40% bonds, which, based on experience and clients at work, that probably covers about 70% of the people in the UK are going to be there or thereabouts in terms of what they're invested in within their pension. Now, when crunching the numbers to work out how much you actually need within your pension to produce that £3,000 a month, I've used historical market data. And I've based all of this on a 75% success rate. Now, simply what this means is that this would have been the pension pot size you needed in 75 of the last 100 years to ensure you've got enough in that pension to support that level of spending for the rest of your life. Now, clearly, in the other 25 of those 100 scenarios, you would have needed more money than this because, let's say, for example, you retired just before the 2008 financial crisis or in the 70s, for example, you would have needed more than this. But when we're building these retirement plans for clients, the 75% to 80% success rate is roughly what we would aim for. So based on all of this, crunching the numbers, you would need a pension pot size to produce that £3,000 a month of spending, and this is the net of tax spending, of about £850,000. Now, you might be looking at this figure and planning to spend £3,000 a month and thinking, I am nowhere near that £850,000. And that's completely fine because there are two factors we've got to actually include here that are going to reduce this pension pot size required. The first is the fact that you're not going to be spending the same in your 80s as you are in your 60s. So quite often what we see with clients is that around age 75, they're going to reduce their expenses because, they're going to slow down. They're probably not going to be in the best of health. And therefore, some of those discretionary expenses I mentioned earlier are probably going to reduce. So in this example, I've assumed a reduction in spending by about 25% from the age of 75. And this reduces the pension pot size required to £765,000. So you can see that by reducing those assumed expenses, that pension pot size required reduces by about 10% or £85,000. Now, the second thing we need to factor in is the state pension. Now, for most people, that's payable from age 67 and is going to be about £12,500 a year or £1,000 a month if we're going to work in normal terms in monthly rather than annual. So if we then include that in the calculation, that reduces the pension pot size required for that £3,000 a month to £580,000. So you can see how much of an impact having that state pension actually has on the pension pot size you need. Now, I get it. Look, this has all been based on retiring at age 60 and having £3,000 a month worth of spending. But that's probably going to cover a very small percentage of people watching this video because some people will spend a bit more, some people will spend a bit less, some people might retire, let's say a couple of years earlier, some may retire a little later. So on screen now, I've put the range of pension pot sizes required for differing levels of spending and different retirement ages. And again, this is all assuming you've got the full state pension and your expenses reduced by 25% from the age of 75 onwards. So I'd be really interested to hear from you what you think of this data and the research because, like I said at the start of the video, that 77% for me is far too high because saying to someone they're going to be spending £45,000 a year, year in, year out throughout retirement, when they may not even be earning that much whilst they're working after you account for tax is, quite frankly, ridiculous in my eyes. So I'd love to hear from you as to what you think about the data and how much of your pre-retirement spending you're actually planning to spend during retirement. Now, all of these figures have been based on you having just one pension pot, but ultimately this is probably going to account for a very small percentage of the population because, you might have, let's say, rental income coming in, you might have final salary pension, you might have an ISA. So what I would suggest you do if you have got these other bits and pieces around your scenario and your circumstances is use my free retirement calculator. And you can find a link to this in the description below. And what this allows you to do is you can go in and put your own details in. So your current age, your current pension pot, what you're earning, how much you're paying into your pension each month, all of those sorts of details. And once you've inputted all of that, it will then show you if you are on track to retire when you want to with the income you want. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one.